The scent of lilies still clung to my sleeves when my children started arguing over their father's watch. Still, I poured their tea, smiling like a mother who hadn't already buried more than a husband. As their voices rose, the clinking cups sounded like coins, louder than grief, cheaper than love. The same flowers they laid on his coffin wilted in my hands as I signed the last donation slip. That's when I knew blood doesn't make family, decency does. So I gave away everything he owned and left them to inherit the silence. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The funeral had ended less than an hour ago, but the scent of lilies still clung stubbornly to Nora's sweater as she stepped into her own home, now full of whispers and casseroles. People moved through the space like they were rehearsing a memory. Old friends and neighbors brought Tupperware and murmured condolences, balancing grief and green bean dishes like offerings to a god no one fully trusted. The kitchen counters disappeared under foil-covered sympathy. Someone had already rearranged the throw pillows on the living room couch. Nora moved like she was underwater, controlled, graceful, hollowed out. She smiled the way widows were expected to, tired, grateful, touched, but composed. Her hands clasped one another in front of her waist, knuckles pale against the dark navy of her dress. Every few minutes, someone touched her arm, offered a new version of the same well-intended nothing. Let me know if you need anything. Oh, Nora, he was just the finest man. You were so strong today, so poised. She nodded, murmured thanks, offered hugs that ended too quickly, then drifted toward the kitchen, drawn by the distant click of a phone camera shutter. Bethany, standing by the fireplace where Frank's urn sat, silver, modest, elegant, the way he'd wanted it. Bethany had positioned it next to a vase of white roses. She tilted her phone, stepped back, adjusted again, then snapped another photo. The flick of her wrist was too casual, too practiced. Caption it something simple, she whispered to herself. Rest easy, Dad, or maybe he always loved roses. Before Nora could approach, Gavin's voice cut through from the dining room. Well, I don't see why the watch shouldn't go to me. I was with him when he bought it. He told me it was going to be mine one day. That's not what I heard, said Lauren, his wife, with a tight smile. Didn't he promise it to Elliot when he turned 16? Nora paused in the hallway. She could see the shadow of her children through the etched glass of the French doors. Their voices were low, but the tone unmistakable, possessive, calculating, like a will was being read, and everyone wanted a piece. The cabin should go to someone who will actually use it, Bethany chimed in, now emerging from the living room, eyes still on her phone. It's just sitting up there collecting dust. Gavin hasn't even been since, 2018? That's not true, Gavin snapped. I took the boys up there last spring. Sure. And left beer cans in the fire pit, Bethany muttered. In the center of it all, Nora stood motionless, half-shadowed in the entryway between rooms, forgotten by her own children in her own house. Her tea had gone cold in her hand. She still hadn't changed out of her heels. Elaine came up beside her, silent for a moment. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, said, Vultures wear suits now. Nora exhaled slowly, as if her ribs had been holding their breath. She gave Elaine a sidelong glance, but said nothing. Instead, she turned toward the living room, where a pair of church friends were rearranging chairs to make space for more guests. Gavin was now explaining to someone how the den furniture is antique. Dad got it appraised back in '09, while Bethany angled herself into the foyer for better light, trying to catch a reflection of the urn behind her in the mirror. She checked her teeth, then smiled and snapped a selfie. Nora didn't blink. She took a slow sip of her tea. Her hands were steady. She remembered Frank's voice the night before the surgery, the one he didn't survive. If anything happens to me, let them show you who they really are. They were showing her now. Across the room, Gavin gestured toward the hall closet. Mom doesn't even use the Tahoe anymore. It's just sitting there, Lauren nodded. We should at least ask. She probably doesn't even know where the title is. Nora turned to Elaine. Would you mind taking my cup? Elaine took it gently, concern flickering in her eyes. Of course. You okay? Nora smiled, sharp this time. Never better. She turned and walked past her children. past the petty bickering and entitlement and curated grief. No one noticed her leave the room, not even when she opened the door to Frank's study, stepped inside, and quietly locked it behind her. Inside the dim-lit room, dust floated in the amber light from the desk lamp. A thick folder sat on the desk, where she had left it this morning. She opened it. Handwritten notes, legal documents, photocopies of bank statements, a flash drive. Nora sat down slowly, the leather chair creaking under her, and smiled again, this time for no one but herself. She finally knew where to begin. The next morning brought weak November sunlight and the distant clatter of trash trucks down Maple Street. Nora stood by the window, coffee cooling in her hand, watching shadows stretch across the front lawn like old bones. Inside, the house had the stillness of a battlefield after smoke. Then came voices, casual, too loud for morning. Gavin and Bethany had let themselves in with spare keys. Again, Nora remained still, hearing them before they saw her. "I made a list," Gavin said, flipping through a notepad as he stepped into the dining room. "It's just basic stuff to divide fairly. Tahoe, his watch, the rifles, the cabin furniture. Oh, and the coin collection." "Don't forget the record player," Bethany said, slipping off her coat and setting her purse on Nora's favorite wingback. "The one from '67. I want it. Dad played that when I had chicken pox." "Sure," Gavin said, not looking up. "And I think it makes sense I take the lawn tractor. I mean, Mom's not using it. And the garage space is—" "Gavin," Bethany cut in, setting her phone on the dining table. "I'm claiming the antique dresser in the guest room. The one with the curved mirror. It's perfect for flat lays and sentimental posts. That thing photographs like a dream." Gavin raised a brow. "You want it because it photographs well?" "It's a vibe," she said, already opening Instagram. "Don't make this weird." Nora walked in slowly, the hem of her sweater brushing her calves, the mug still in her hand. Neither of them paused. She took a seat at the table like a ghost invited to her own seance. "I just figured we'd do this while it's all still fresh," Gavin said, tapping his list. "Make it fair, clean lines, no drama." Bethany nodded, thumbs dancing over her screen. "It's what Dad would have wanted." Nora didn't answer. She sipped her coffee. It had gone bitter. They went on like she wasn't there, listing things, room by room. Quantifying a man's life into lawn tools and heirloom glass. From the kitchen, Elaine appeared, silent as always, arms folded. She caught Nora's eye and tilted her head toward the hallway. "Let me borrow you for a minute," she said gently. They stepped into the laundry room, quiet, cold, the hum of the dryer the only sound. Elaine turned, face tight. "You're just letting them divvy up the house like it's a garage sale." Nora leaned against the dryer, eyes tired but alert. "It's easier than stopping them." Elaine's voice dropped. "Don't let them strip your peace while you're still breathing." Nora looked at her, expression unreadable. Then, "They can't take what I've already given." Elaine didn't speak, just held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, half approval, half prayer. By noon, the house was quiet again. Bethany had gone to post a tribute slideshow, complete with a sepia filter and Coldplay audio. Gavin had a tea time, or so he said. Nora walked through the rooms, taking them in as they were now, half picked over, disrupted. A lamp missing from the sideboard, a jacket that didn't belong draped over the banister. Her life paused mid-sentence. She opened Frank's study again, sat at his desk, took out the flash drive, then checked the time. The glass door of Paul Winchester's law office was still smudged from last night's rain. The kind of local law firm that shared space with a dentist and a tax preparer, tucked in a 2-story brick building near the post office. Nothing flashy, which was exactly why she'd picked it. Paul stood as she entered, mid-50s, neat hair, buttoned down under a wool vest. The kind of man who never rushed a sentence. "Nora," he said, walking around his desk to shake her hand. "I'm so sorry, thank you," she said. "But I'm not here for condolences." She sat, removed a small stack of documents from her bag. His brows lifted slightly. "Is that—" "Frank's file," she said. "He gave it to me a month ago." Paul's fingers hovered over the papers. "Did he tell you what was inside?" "I read it." He looked at her carefully. "Are you sure you want to act on this now?" Nora folded her hands in her lap. They're already acting like he's been gone for years. I'm just catching up. Paul was silent. Then he opened the file. Outside, the wind kicked up, scattering dry leaves against the glass like they were trying to warn someone. By Thursday morning, the list was complete. Nora sat across from Paul in his quiet office, her pen moving steadily as she signed the last of the donation documents. The pages were crisp, the language sterile, but each signature was a scalpel. Frank's coin collection, gone to the Veterans Center auction drive. The cherrywood armoire Bethany coveted, donated to a local hospice resale boutique. 2 framed lithographs from the hallway, both signed by mid-century American artists, gifted to the Regional Arts Council for their upcoming benefit. The antique dresser from the guest room, already picked up that morning. Jewelry, porcelain, end tables, a few rugs. One of Frank's shotguns, legally transferred to a historical preservation lodge for display. It was surgical, clean, and entirely legal. Paul watched her from behind his wire-rimmed glasses, the signed forms stacked neatly between them. You realize, he said slowly, this won't go unnoticed. Nora closed the folder. Good, he hesitated. They'll be shocked, probably furious. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Grief should teach, she said calmly, not reward greed. Paul exhaled, something between a chuckle and a sigh. You always did play the long game. She smiled, but didn't deny it. Back at home, the front room smelled faintly of old wood and lemon oil. Nora had opened the windows for the first time in weeks. The cold air cut through the house, crisp and honest. Elaine sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a cardboard box in her lap. Inside were faded photographs, yellowed letters, and curled ticket stubs from concerts and road trips. The kind of clutter that meant nothing to Bethany or Gavin. The kind that meant everything to Nora. Where do you want the letters? Elaine asked, gently lifting a bundle tied in blue string. Nora took it. Her fingers paused on the handwriting. That box is for what stays. They worked silently for a while. The hospice truck was scheduled to arrive after dark. Quietly, no logo on the van. Paul had arranged it all. Discretion was one of his talents. Elaine held up a photo of Frank holding Nora in front of a cabin porch, both of them laughing, wind in their hair. You look so damn happy here. We were, Nora said simply. Before the kids? Nora paused, then nodded. Before expectations replaced conversations. Elaine didn't press. Across the room, the grandfather clock chimed 4. The sun had already begun to sink. Nora reached into a separate manila folder and pulled out a final document. Thicker than the others, more personal. She placed it in Elaine's lap. What's this? Elaine asked, frowning as she flipped through the paperwork. A scholarship, Nora said. Frank loved mentoring his students. We're setting up a fund at the community college for underprivileged art students, first-gen, working class, kids like he was. Elaine looked up, eyes wide. In his name? Nora nodded. He hated the idea of wealth sitting still. He told me once, money should move, like paint across a canvas. Elaine's throat tightened. They're going to lose their minds. I hope so, Nora said softly, no venom in her tone. Only truth. Outside, headlights flashed through the window. The van. Elaine stood, smoothing her pants. Want me to talk to them? Nora shook her head. I've got it. She stepped onto the porch, coat buttoned, clipboard in hand. The driver approached, a soft-spoken man named Leonard. He looked to be in his 40s, polite, no small talk, just business. She handed him the list, pointed to the side entrance. Everything's labeled and ready. You'll find it just inside. Leonard nodded. I'll be quick. And he was. 20 minutes later, the items were loaded, each one a piece her children had mentally claimed, now carried away in silence and taillights. Nora watched from the doorway until the van turned out of the cul-de-sac and disappeared. Behind her, the house felt lighter, a little emptier, a little freer. She walked into the study, pulled open the bottom drawer, and removed the envelope Frank had marked for when they start circling. She sat, tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. No greeting, just a name and a number, and below it, in Frank's uneven scrawl, "This man knows what Gavin did." Nora stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached for the phone. The front porch creaked as Tessa stepped onto it, arms wrapped around her middle, breath visible in the morning chill. The sun hadn't fully climbed over the trees yet, and the air still carried the rawness of night. She'd flown in late the night before, quietly, without fanfare. No dramatic entrance, no Instagram updates. Just a tired knock on the back door and a long hug with Nora that said more than anything spoken. Now, she stood staring at the stack of boxes lined along the far side of the porch, each marked with a green sticker, a neatly printed label. Kindred Hands donation, hold pickup. Friday, 10 M linens, books, accent pillows, ceramic dishes wrapped in newsprint, framed watercolors. It was the kind of pile you saw when someone was moving out of a life, not just a house. Tessa turned slowly, her voice still scratchy from sleep. You're giving away everything. Nora stood in the doorway, sweater sleeves pushed to her elbows, mug in hand. Not everything, she said. Just what doesn't need to stay. Tessa stepped closer to one of the boxes and ran her fingers over the label. Kindred Hands. That's hospice, right? Nora nodded. They cared for Frank's mother in the end. Quietly. Well, he remembered that. Tessa knelt beside the largest box, where the edge of an old oil painting peeked out, one that used to hang in the hallway upstairs. Gavin and Bethany don't know. No, Nora said. They think this weekend is for sorting, for bargaining. Tessa looked up. And you're just going to give it away? Nora stepped out beside her, her voice low and even. I'm giving it away in his memory, not their expectation. A crow called out from the oak tree across the street. The world felt painfully still for a moment. They'll lose it, Tessa said. Gavin will get loud, Bethany will cry, then rage post. I know, Nora said, sipping her coffee. Tessa's brow furrowed. I mean, really lose it. You saw how they acted over the watch. What happens when they find out the house is half empty and it wasn't even theirs to mourn? Nora didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the quiet street, as if waiting for something bigger than traffic or confrontation. Then, calmly, maybe they'll learn there's nothing to lose when love's gone first. Tessa leaned back on her heels, the cold porch wood biting through her leggings. That's harsh. It's true. Tessa glanced away, jaw tight. You think I'm like them. I think you still ask why, Nora said gently, which means there's hope. Inside, a mug clinked softly against the kitchen counter. Elaine had been listening. She stepped out, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl, hair still wild from sleep. Tess, she said warmly, come sit. Tessa rose slowly, brushing off her hands, and followed her back inside. In the kitchen, the light had changed, golden and warm, hitting the floor in clean lines. It felt like a different house than the one filled with whispers and itemized grief just days ago. Elaine poured her coffee and slid it across the table. Mercy, she said, sometimes looks like cold decisions, and this, she gestured toward the porch, is mercy wrapped in discipline. Tessa stared at her. Mercy for who? Elaine's eyes didn't flinch. For you, for Nora, for Frank's name. And maybe, just maybe for them too, if it shakes them awake. Tessa swallowed, eyes glassy but dry. I just hate that it feels like we're burning the house down. We're not, Nora said from the doorway. We're clearing the smoke. The silence that followed was long and clean. Not strained, not heavy, just honest. Then, without another word, Tessa stood and grabbed the first box. She walked it down to the edge of the porch, set it beside the others, then turned back for another. By the time the sun had risen fully, half the stack was moved. Inside, Nora opened the hall closet. A photo album fell sideways as she reached for an old winter coat. When she bent to pick it up, a smaller envelope slipped out from between the pages. One she hadn't seen before. It was sealed. On the front, in Frank's steady hand, "Do not open until after the second lie." She stood, fingers tightening around the envelope. Breath caught halfway between memory and realization. The call came at 9:03 a.m. Elaine was in the kitchen rinsing coffee mugs. Tessa had just stepped out to walk the dog Nora still referred to as that shaggy thing you insisted on rescuing. The sun had barely warmed the edges of the frosted grass outside when Nora's phone buzzed violently on the side table. Gavin, incoming call. She stared at the screen, then tapped speaker, with the same calm she might use to flick a crumb off her sleeve. His voice hit like a slammed door. "Mom, what the hell is going on with the house?" Nora remained seated on the edge of the couch, legs crossed, hands in her lap. "Good morning to you too, Gavin." "I'm serious," he barked. Bethany went by and said half the furniture's gone. The dresser, the lithographs, the rug Dad bought in Santa Fe. "Where is it?" "Donated," Nora said. There was a pause, the kind that usually came before something breaks. "Donated?" His laugh was humorless. "You gave it away? That was thousands of dollars of stuff." "Frank didn't leave things," she said evenly. "He left love. Love doesn't pay for storage," he snapped. Elaine glanced up from the kitchen doorway but stayed silent. Nora continued. "You weren't storing love. You were circling it. That's different." Another voice cut in. Bethany. She'd joined the call. "This is insane. You didn't even tell us. That dresser was in our family for years. You could have at least let us bid on it." "Bid?" Nora echoed. "I didn't know I was holding an auction." Bethany exhaled, exasperated. "This isn't like you, Mom. You're being impulsive, erratic. This isn't grief. This is punishment." Nora stood and walked slowly to the front window. Outside, the porch sat clean and bare. No more donation boxes, just sunlight on the slats. "I gave away things neither of you valued until you couldn't have them," she said. "That's not punishment. That's clarity." "You're cutting us off," Gavin accused. "You know what that dresser could have sold for, and the armoire, the coins. You just..." "Don't finish that sentence," Nora said quietly. Gavin stopped. Then Bethany. "Dad wouldn't have wanted this." Nora smiled faintly. "You don't get to say what your father would have wanted. You didn't ask him when he was alive." The silence that followed was colder than the air outside. Her laptop dinged softly. New mail. She crossed the room, clicked the notification. Paul's name lit up her inbox subject line: "Finalized donation and transfer receipts. Secure copy." She opened the PDF. Crisp legal confirmation. Done, stamped, and irreversible. "Bethany Gavin," she said, still looking at the screen. "You'll receive an acknowledgement letter from the scholarship board next week. The fund is active now. You can donate too, if the mood strikes." "You're not even listening to us," Gavin snapped. "I am," Nora replied. "I've just stopped mistaking noise for meaning." Bethany made a frustrated sound. "This isn't how families work. You don't just give everything away like a damn saint and expect us to applaud." "I'm not expecting applause," Nora said. "I'm expecting you to grieve like adults." "You know what?" Gavin growled. "Don't expect anything from us at all. You want to cut ties? Fine. Don't come crying later when you're alone." Then he hung up. Bethany followed 3 seconds later. The living room returned to its quiet hum. Just the tick of the grandfather clock and the faint rustle of branches against the front window. Elaine walked in with a dish towel in her hands. "Well, that sounded productive." Nora closed the laptop. "They think they're cutting me off." Elaine smiled, warm and sad. "You built the house they're standing on. Let them figure out what happens when you take the blueprint back." Nora didn't speak. She reached for the envelope on the end table, the one that had fallen from the album, still sealed. She turned it over in her hands again. "Do not open until after the second lie." Gavin had just delivered his second. She slid her thumb under the flap. Inside, a single page, 3 words underlined in red. "Not his son." Nora stared at the page, the weight of it landing in the center of her chest like a second funeral. Behind her, Elaine whispered, "What is it?" Nora's fingers trembled slightly as she folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. Then she turned, calm again, collected. "I need to find a woman named Meredith Kane." The courthouse smelled like old varnish and resignation. Paul met Nora in the marble-floored atrium, his wool coat draped over one arm, a manila folder in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Lawyers rarely did when families turned funerals into filings. "They called this morning," he said, as they walked toward the small conference room. Both of them. Separate calls, same threats. "I'm not surprised," Nora said. Her voice was steady. "They never liked sharing, not even blame." Paul gave a dry half-smile. "They're talking about contesting the estate." "And?" He opened the folder, sliding a sheaf of papers across the table. "They can't. Everything Frank owned, including the house, was held jointly with rights of survivorship. The moment he passed, it all became yours. Irrevocably, Nora studied the legal print, the familiar rhythm of clauses and signatures. So they have no claim. None, Paul said. Not even moral standing. You've already honored his wishes, more than anyone expected. She traced her fingertip down the first page, pausing at the name of the new trust, the Franklin Hale Art Scholarship Fund. Paul leaned back. We've filed the final paperwork. The scholarship is active. The college already issued a press release. She looked up, eyes narrowing. Without consulting me, he smiled. They assumed you'd prefer it that way. Quiet dignity, no ribbon cutting. Nora's lips twitched. They were right. Paul closed the folder and folded his hands. You've done everything by the book, Nora. The law is on your side. I'm not worried about the law, she said softly. I'm worried about the noise. The noise arrived that evening. Bethany's followers, hundreds of them, filled the internet with filtered outrage. Unfair inheritance. Grieving daughter. Family should mean something. Her caption under a black and white photo of her and Frank read, Some people grieve by remembering, some by erasing. Thousands of hearts. Sympathy comments from strangers. One tagged gossip blog picked it up before midnight. By morning, there were think pieces about elder isolation and emotional overreach. Even local news hinted at a contested estate. Gavin added his own fuel, a statement on his business page, pretending civility while questioning his mother's mental wellness during a time of duress. Elaine found Nora at the kitchen counter, reading one of the articles on her tablet. The headline pulsed across the screen. Local family torn apart over mysterious donations. They're turning you into a villain, Elaine said, and they don't even know the story. Nora set the tablet down, folded her hands. They don't want the story. They want an audience. Tessa leaned against the doorframe. You should say something. I have nothing to defend. Mom, Tessa pressed. If you don't speak, they get to write the ending. Nora looked out the window, the same oak tree where crows perched during the funeral. She thought of Frank's voice, that last warning, let them show you who they really are. She turned back toward the table, pulled her phone closer, and opened the app she rarely used. A blinking cursor waited for her to feed it something public, something raw. She typed 8 words. Grief is not a marketplace. She hit post. No hashtags, no photos, no defense. Just a sentence like a bell rung in a quiet church. Then she set the phone down and poured herself a glass of water. By the time evening came, her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Thousands of shares, hundreds of messages, comments from strangers who'd buried parents, spouses, siblings, all echoing the same thing. Thank you for saying what needed to be said. Someone had screenshot it, framed it over a blurred picture of hands releasing ash over the sea. It had gone viral on its own terms, stripped of spectacle, full of resonance. Tessa stood beside her, scrolling through the notifications. They're calling you the quiet widow. Some writer from a magazine wants to interview you. Nora smiled faintly. Then she's not listening closely enough. Elaine came in, holding a printed email from Paul. He sent confirmation. The scholarship press release hit the college paper. The first applications are already coming in. Nora took the printout, eyes skimming the words. Legacy, hope, opportunity. All of it felt distant now, like light breaking through old clouds. Elaine set a hand on her shoulder. You won, you know. They can shout all they want. It's over. Nora folded the page carefully, slid it into the drawer beside the envelope she'd already read. No, she said quietly. It's only over for them. Elaine frowned. What does that mean? Nora's eyes lifted, clear and deliberate. I found Meredith Kane. She turned her laptop around. On the screen was a driver's license record, black and white photo, last known address. And beside it, a small box labeled Child Support Inquiry, closed. Under father's name, Franklin Hale. Under child's name, Gavin Kane. Nora closed the laptop with a soft click. Now, she said, it's time to find out who told the first lie. The conference room was beige in every possible way. Walls, carpet, even the coffee cups. The kind of space designed to keep tempers civil and emotions flat. But the stillness couldn't disguise the heat that followed Gavin and Bethany through the door. Gavin's jaw was already set, his tie pulled too tight. Bethany looked perfectly curated for sympathy. Soft sweater, pearl earrings, eyes glassy but practiced. Across the table, Nora sat with her hands folded, flanked by Paul on one side and Tessa on the other. Elaine waited in the back row of chairs against the wall, silent support embodied in a wool coat and folded arms. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with calm eyes and a folder full of forms, introduced herself. We're here to discuss concerns regarding the Hale estate and associated charitable transfers. This is a voluntary mediation, not litigation. Then let's make it quick, Gavin snapped. We want the donations reversed. The items sold and the proceeds distributed fairly. That includes the scholarship fund. Bethany nodded with sharp enthusiasm. Mom's been acting out of guilt, not reason. We've spoken to friends, and frankly— Friends, Nora interrupted softly. Or followers. Bethany flushed, her voice tightening. This isn't about me. No, Nora said. That's the problem. It never is. Paul adjusted his glasses, measured. Everything was transferred legally, with full documentation and intent. Your father's estate was non-contestable. There's no legal mechanism for reversal. Gavin leaned forward, knuckles white. You're hiding behind paperwork. This isn't about law, it's about family. Nora looked at him steadily. Family doesn't send threats through lawyers. The mediator raised a hand gently. Let's keep this constructive. Bethany's tone sharpened, the fragile tremor in her voice rehearsed but effective. You call this constructive. She's given away our childhood. The things that made our home a home. She's rewriting Dad's memory for strangers. Nora turned toward her daughter. Those things didn't make the home, Bethany. We did, or we were supposed to. Bethany's eyes glistened. You're being emotionally cruel. No, Nora said. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. Cruelty is measuring love by resale value. A flicker passed across the mediator's face, something like quiet respect. Nora continued, her tone calm and precise. Every object that left that house now lives somewhere it matters. The dresser is in a hospice guest room where daughters sit by dying mothers. The armoire holds donated quilts made by veterans' wives. The lithographs hang in a school library where students see art for the first time. Those things have new stories now, ones not priced or posted. Bethany opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The mediator spoke gently. Legally, Miss Hale is correct. There is no basis for reversal. These were gifts made with clear intent, and ownership has transferred. Gavin shoved back from the table. So that's it? We just lose everything? Nora tilted her head slightly. You didn't lose anything you ever earned. His face darkened, words failing him for once. He turned toward the mediator. Dad would hate this. Tessa spoke quietly, her first words all morning. No, he'd hate this. She gestured to the table, to the divide carved down the middle by greed and grief. The room went still. Bethany's jaw trembled. You're siding with her? I'm siding with the truth, Tessa said. You're fighting over furniture while Mom's still breathing. Bethany's chair scraped back, her voice cracking. You've all lost it. She stormed out first. The echo of her heels lingered like punctuation. Gavin stayed just long enough to gather his papers, muttering under his breath as he followed. Dad would never forgive you for this. When the door shut, the silence felt enormous. The mediator exhaled softly. Miss Hale. I'll file the closure paperwork. There's nothing more to mediate. Paul nodded. We're done here. Elaine stood from the back, her eyes on Nora. You handled that like a conductor, not a combatant. Nora gave a small, weary smile. It wasn't a battle, it was a mirror. Tessa reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. You okay? I will be, Nora said. Once I know why Meredith Kane disappeared. Paul looked up sharply. You're still pursuing that. She's not hard to find, Nora said, slipping a folded piece of paper from her purse, the address she'd printed that morning. What's hard is learning how long everyone's known her name. Her gaze flicked toward Paul, just for a moment. He looked away first. The gravel popped under Nora's tires as she pulled off the county road and turned up the wooded slope. The trees had thinned for winter, their bare limbs like raised hands against a graying sky. The cabin came into view just past the bend, nestled where the mountains shrugged against the horizon. She parked beside the half-buried fire pit. The stone chimney stood like a sentinel against the cold. It had been years. She stepped out slowly, the chill biting through her coat as wind pressed through the trees. A quiet so complete it bordered on sacred. The porch groaned under her boots. At the railing, she reached for the groove that had splintered long ago. Her fingers traced the initials carved there, F plus Sidian, etched into the wood with a pocket knife one summer when they were still playing house and not surviving it. She stood there a long moment. Then she unlocked the door. The air inside smelled like old pine, dried sap, and the stubborn trace of ash. It hit her like breath held too long. She didn't turn on the lights. Each step creaked with memory. There was the scarred workbench by the window, where Frank used to oil his tools, like they were living things. His flannel jacket still hung on a hook by the door. She pulled it down, folded it carefully, and laid it on the table. In the corner, an old red toolbox waited. She opened it, lids groaning. Screwdrivers, hand saws, a file worn smooth from years of use. Nothing fancy. Just things touched too many times to be tossed. She closed the lid, picked up her phone. The number rang twice. Veterans Woodworks, this is Tom. Hi, Tom. My name is Nora Hale. I have a donation. They arrived 2 days later. A modest pickup truck with a clean logo, and 2 men in navy jackets, who spoke softly and moved with care. She helped them load the tools, the jacket, even the lumber scraps Frank had saved, just in case. Before they left, she pressed an envelope into Tom's hands. Inside, a check, modest, but intentional. Use it to buy clamps, she said. He was always short on clamps. Tom smiled. We'll build something real with these. You have my word. When the truck turned down the hill and vanished behind the trees, Nora sat on the porch steps, mug in hand. Steam drifted into the cold air. Elaine pulled up 15 minutes later in her rusted Subaru. She got out, carrying a thermos and a second cup. You didn't wait for me, she said, mock scolding. I didn't want you to see me cry, Nora replied. Elaine handed her the cup. Bad news, Nora. I'm a professional friend. Seen it all. They sat side by side, the boards under them weathered and familiar. The trees rustled like old gossip. This place still smells like him, Nora said quietly. Like cedar, sweat, smoke. Elaine sipped her coffee. He'd love what you're doing. Nora nodded slowly. He used to say things should either be useful or beautiful. Otherwise, they're just waiting to rot. Elaine looked out at the horizon, where fog crept through the ravine like breath. So you're teaching the cabin to teach. Nora didn't respond right away. She glanced at the trees, the sky, the door behind her. Then, he'd rather this place teach than rot. Elaine nodded. They sat like that for a long time. The clouds shifted. A hawk circled once overhead and disappeared into the ridgeline. Inside, the wind nudged the door just enough to make it creak, soft, like a whisper. Nora stood, brushing her hands off on her jeans. I need to go, she said. Elaine stood too. Where to? South of Asheville, Nora replied. Meredith Kane lives in a red ranch house with a plastic flamingo out front and a mailbox that leans a little left. Elaine blinked. You already drove by? I needed to see she was real. Nora turned toward the car. Now I need to hear what else is. The stream behind the cabin whispered like it remembered things no one else did. Nora led the way down the sloped trail behind the property, boots crunching softly over old pine needles and gravel. Tessa followed, hands tucked deep into the pockets of her fleece jacket, face pink from the cold. They hadn't said much on the drive up from the main road. Tessa had met her at a gas station on Route 9 with a small cooler and 2 sandwiches. Neither of them had touched. Now they moved without speaking, their silence companionable. Intentional. When they reached the clearing, the stream appeared, narrow, fast-moving, cutting through the rocks like it had a schedule to keep. On the far side, a fallen log stretched from bank to mossy bank. Nora stopped short of it, looking down into the current. Tessa's breath fogged in the air. It's beautiful. He always liked this spot, Nora said. Used to sit here with a sketchbook he never showed anyone. You kept it? Nora shook her head. Burned it. At his request. Tessa didn't ask why. Some things didn't want to be remembered, only released. Nora pulled a small brass tin from the inside of her coat. Not the urn Bethany had photographed. not the ceremonial one. This was practical, scratched from years of being tucked into drawers and carried on hikes. She unscrewed the lid slowly. Inside, a palmful of gray-white ash. Tessa stepped closer. Is it weird that this doesn't feel like a funeral? No, Nora said. It feels like a promise. She tilted the tin toward the wind. The ash caught the breeze gently, scattered in a long arc over the stream. Some fell quickly, dissolving into the current. Some drifted upward, then spiraled down like memory surrendering. They watched in silence until it was done. Nora resealed the tin, slipped it back into her coat. After a beat, Tessa's voice came, small but firm. They think you gave it all away to punish them. I know, Nora said, but you didn't. Nora looked down at the water, then at her daughter. No, she said. I did it to preserve something they'd already let go of. Tessa's brow furrowed. Nora turned toward the trees, her voice quieter now. Your father's memory deserves movement, not dust. These things, they weren't just things. They were fixed moments. And fixed things rot. He believed that. He lived that. Tessa swallowed. They'll never get it. They don't need to, Nora said, folding her arms. This isn't their story. Tessa stepped forward and hugged her, not for show, not for comfort, just to share the weight of it. Nora held her tightly, chin resting briefly on her daughter's hair, which smelled faintly of wood smoke and mint. When they pulled apart, the sun had dropped behind the ridge. The light changed, more blue now, more honest. Long shadows stretched from the trees like slow-moving secrets. They climbed the hill in silence. When they reached the car, Nora paused before unlocking the door. Tessa looked over. Do you believe Meredith Kane will give you answers? I don't know, Nora said, but I'm not looking for answers anymore. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Then what? Truth, Nora said, sliding into the driver's seat. Answers can be shaped. Truth stands whether I'm ready for it or not. Tessa nodded, the words settling somewhere deep. They drove down the mountain with the windows cracked just enough to let in the cold. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Behind them, the cabin stayed dark, quiet, and empty, but not hollow. And just ahead, at the bend in the road, Nora's phone buzzed once from the center console. A name flashed across the screen, Meredith Kane. Bethany sat framed by soft light and softly blurred bookshelves. A mug of untouched tea steamed faintly beside her, more prop than comfort. She pressed record, her voice shaky but well-practiced. I didn't want to do this, she began, breath trembling just enough. But my silence has been mistaken for guilt, and my grief deserves space too. She paused, letting the weight of that hang. My father was more than old furniture, more than a scholarship fund with a plaque. He was ours, and now he's been taken from us twice. 35 minutes after she posted it, the video hit 10,000 views. By nightfall, it crossed 100,000, and then the comments came. Wait, wasn't she the one selling vintage end tables last year for $900 each? Her whole brand is turning grief into soft lighting and affiliate codes. Come on. Didn't she say in another video that she and her dad weren't close? Something about emotional distance and boundaries? Side-by-side screenshots emerged. Bethany's grief speech versus old posts. Her joking about growing up emotionally independent, calling her parents' house a mausoleum of mid-century guilt. A Reddit thread dissected her tone, her timeline, even her furniture choices. A former college friend claimed Bethany used to call her dad the silent funder. One comment soared to the top. There's a difference between mourning and marketing. Another, if grief is a performance, at least get your facts straight. Bethany tried to push back with a clarifying post. It only made things worse. At 10:17 the next morning, Nora's phone buzzed once. Tessa. People see through her. Nora sat on the sunroom love seat, her phone resting on her lap, unread. The dog lay curled beside her, snoring quietly into the corner of a throw pillow. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The only thing she'd said publicly, grief is not a marketplace. It was still out there, quiet, reposted without filter, without commentary. It had traveled further than she expected, and still she stayed silent. Her grief didn't need proof. It had already built something. Elaine arrived at noon with 2 iced teas, a pastry box, and a rolled newspaper tucked under one arm. Nora looked up as she walked in. "You came bearing peace offerings." "I came bearing evidence," Elaine said. "Of impact." She unrolled the paper and handed it over. A full-color photo sprawled across the top fold. Young man, dark curls, wide smile, paint on his hands and jeans. He stood beside a mural in progress outside a local community center. The headline read, "New Chapter, Hale Scholarship Recipient Inspires. Mural on Loss, Legacy, and Finding Voice." Nora read the subhead twice before reading on. Malik Jensen, 19, is the first recipient of the Franklin Hale Memorial Art Scholarship, created to support students who wouldn't otherwise be seen by traditional academic routes. "I used to think grief was what closed you off from the world," he told reporters. "Turns out it can be the thing that helps you speak." Elaine sat across from her, watching her closely. They interviewed his mother, too. Single mom, works nights. Said she'd never heard her son call anything hopeful before this month. Nora ran her hand gently across the grainy image of Malik's smile. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Not right away. Elaine reached for the remote. "It's on the local news replay. You should see him in motion." The TV flickered to life. On screen, Malik stood beside his mural, vibrant colors, long strokes across a concrete wall, hands reaching toward sky. His voice was soft, nervous, honest. "My dad wasn't in the picture," he said. "But someone else's was. Someone who didn't know me still believed I was worth the effort." Nora's hands trembled as she brought her tea to her lips. Elaine watched quietly. The screen cut to a wide shot, Malik hugging his mother, paint still on his sleeve. Nora blinked once. "I never got to watch Frank mentor someone like that," she whispered. Elaine didn't answer. Nora added, more to herself than anyone else, "But I think he'd like this ending." There was silence between them. Then Nora leaned forward and turned the volume up slightly. Because just as the anchor transitioned to another story, Nora caught a final quote, tucked into the segment's fade-out. Malik's voice again. "We paint what we believe. This scholarship says someone believed in the part of me I hadn't met yet." And for the first time in weeks, Nora let the tears fall. Quietly, no audience, no captions, just proof. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, tucked neatly between a credit card offer and a flyer for a roofing company. Nora recognized the handwriting on the envelope. Not Frank's, of course, but something careful and deliberate. Like the writer knew the importance of clean lines. The return address read, Blue Ridge Veterans Center. She opened it standing by the kitchen sink, steam from her coffee curling against her cheek. "Dear Mrs. Hale, we are honored to let you know that your husband's medals have been received and are now displayed in our main hallway. His name will also hang above the woodworking room, a space now dedicated to both skill and solace, just as he would have wanted. With respect and gratitude, James Everett, Director." Nora reread the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and slipping it into the drawer beside the paperweight Frank had made from a block of oak. Then she exhaled, slow, deliberate, steady. By afternoon, she was on the road. The drive to the center took an hour. Long enough for the mountain fog to lift and the late sunlight to slant across the windshield in sharp gold lines. The building sat back from the main road. Simple brick, 2 stories, an American flag fluttering against the bright blue sky. She parked near the side entrance. No fanfare, no press, just her. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of varnish and coffee. The receptionist recognized her name immediately and stood. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Everett's expecting you." The director emerged moments later, tall and warm-eyed, his handshake gentle but sure. "I'm glad you came," he said. "It's quiet now. You'll have the room to yourself." He led her down a hall lined with photographs, soldiers laughing, working, rebuilding. The air hummed faintly with the sound of distant sanding, wood against wheel. Then they stopped before a glass display. Nora's breath caught. Inside the case, Frank's medals, polished and bright. His nameplate etched cleanly beneath them, Franklin J. Hale, U.S. Army, 1979-1987. Below that, a small wooden box sat open, filled with his old dog tags, a photo of the cabin porch, and the pocket knife with their initials carved into its handle. The plaque above the woodworking room door read simply, The Frank Hale workshop. She stepped closer until her reflection disappeared and all she could see was him. The careful, steady man who built without needing applause. The sunlight from the nearby window cut across the case, making the brass lettering glow. It looked alive. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. After a long moment, she whispered, "You're still teaching." A familiar voice came from behind her. "He's got good company, you know." Nora turned. Tessa stood in the doorway, hair tied back, holding a small digital camera. "I wanted to surprise you," she said, smiling faintly. "You did." Tessa stepped closer, her boots echoing softly on the tile. "Can I take one? Just for us?" Nora nodded. The camera clicked, soft, respectful. The flash didn't fire. The picture wasn't for posting, wasn't for sharing. Just proof that the light had found its way back into their story. Tessa lowered the camera. "He'd like it here. Smells like cedar." Nora smiled. "He'd say the benches are too close together." They both laughed quietly, a shared memory surfacing like a skipped stone returning to water. As they walked toward the exit, the hum of tools from the woodworking room grew louder, men talking low, sawdust drifting like powdered sunlight. Elaine was waiting by the door, holding 2 paper cups from the vending machine. She passed one to Nora, nodding toward the hallway behind her. "You gave him permanence they can't measure." Nora looked back one last time. The brass nameplate gleamed brighter than the rest. "It's not permanence," she said softly. "It's motion that doesn't fade." Elaine smiled. "Then you built the right kind of forever." They stepped outside into the crisp afternoon light. The air was sharp, clean, alive. Nora tilted her face to the sun, eyes half closed. For the first time in months, her chest didn't feel like it was carrying someone else's weight. Tessa slid an arm around her shoulders. "You ready to go home?" Nora nodded. "Almost." She reached into her bag, fingers brushing against a sealed envelope, Meredith Kane's address. Still unopened, still waiting, the sunlight caught its edge like a blade. "First," Nora said quietly, "there's one more visit I have to make." The cafe was nearly empty. A lull between the morning rush and the late lunch crowd. Nora sat near the window, the low hum of espresso machines filling the air. Outside, a few yellow leaves clung to the last branches, trembling in the November wind. She stirred her tea without tasting it. The text from Gavin had been short, almost clinical. "Mom, can we talk? Coffee? Just us." He'd added nothing else, not an apology, not an excuse. But she came anyway. When the door opened, she looked up and saw a man who'd aged faster than his years should have allowed. Gavin's once polished composure had dulled. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. He spotted her instantly, but hesitated before approaching, as if asking permission to cross some invisible threshold. "Hey, Mom," she nodded toward the chair across from her. "Hey." He sat down. The scrape of the metal chair louder than either of them liked. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick, but not hostile, just heavy with the weight of what hadn't been said for months. He finally broke it. "You probably heard. The store? It's not going well." Nora looked at him, calm, neutral. "I hadn't, but I assumed." He swallowed hard. "We overextended. I took out a second loan thinking the holiday season would cover it. It didn't. The investors pulled out." She said nothing, just waited. "I was stupid," he went on. "Too proud to ask for help. Too mad to admit I needed it." Nora's hands stayed folded around her cup. "And now you're asking." He flinched. Not at her tone, it wasn't sharp, but at its accuracy. "I'm not asking for money." His eyes flicked up to hers. "Not really." She tilted her head. "Then what are you asking for, Gavin?" He hesitated. "A chance to fix things, to not be the villain in all this." Nora sat back. The words might have once stung. Now they simply landed. "You were never the villain, Gavin. Just someone who forgot that love isn't a currency." He looked down. "You think that's all I see? Money?" "I think it's what you learned to reach for when you didn't know how to reach for anything else," she said softly. He blinked, jaw tightening. "I messed up." "Yes," she said simply. "You did." The honesty hung there, quiet, not cruel. It didn't accuse, it acknowledged. "I didn't know how to be his son," Gavin admitted. "Dad never told me what he wanted. He just fixed things, built things. I thought if I earned enough, built big enough, he'd notice. He noticed, Nora said. He just thought you already knew. That broke something in him. He pressed a hand to his mouth, his shoulders trembling. He wasn't loud, just small in a way she hadn't seen since he was 8 years old, crying over a broken model airplane Frank had quietly glued back together after bedtime. She reached across the table, laid her hand gently over his. Gavin, love has to be earned, not claimed. And earning it doesn't mean winning. It means showing up. He nodded, tears streaking down his cheek before he could stop them. I wanted you to be proud of me, he said. I am, she said softly. Not for what you've done, for sitting here. He let out a laugh that was almost a sob. You're not going to help me, are you? I just did, she said. He looked at her, bewildered, and then slowly he understood. When the server came by, he ordered black coffee. She stayed with her tea. They talked for another hour, not about the will or the house or the scholarship, but about normal things, the weather, the cafe's terrible pastries, how Tessa's dog had taken to sleeping on the couch like he paid rent. It felt unfamiliar but not fragile, a bridge being rebuilt quietly, plank by plank. When they stood to leave, Gavin hesitated again, hands shoved into his coat pockets. I don't know how to make it right, he said. You just did, Nora replied. He looked at her, eyes red but clear, then extended his hand. She took it, firmly. It wasn't a goodbye, it wasn't absolution. It was the first honest thing they'd exchanged in years. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves spiraled across the parking lot, bright and brittle. Nora watched him walk to his car. Shoulders squared again, but this time from humility, not pride. She turned toward her own car, phone buzzing in her coat pocket. A new message. Unknown number. This is Meredith Kane. I think you deserve the truth about Frank. The call came just after sunset, when the house was quiet and the last of the evening light had turned the windows to mirrors. Nora saw the name before she answered. Bethany. She let it ring once, twice, then tapped accept. Hi, Mom. The voice came cracked and thin, like it had been rehearsed but fell apart on delivery. Nora said nothing, just waited. I saw the comments, on the video, on everything. Bethany's voice wavered. They're tearing me apart. Nora closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned back in the armchair by the window. You made choices, Bethany. The world saw them. Bethany's breath hitched. You think I did this for attention? No, Nora said calmly. I think you did it to be right, and when you weren't, you wanted pity. I was hurting, Bethany snapped. You think giving everything away didn't hurt us? I think grief doesn't entitle you to ownership, Nora said. Not of furniture, and certainly not of narrative. There was a silence, long enough to let truth settle like dust. Bethany broke it. I didn't care about the dresser or the watch or the Tahoe. Not really, Her voice cracked. I wanted Dad's ring, the one he always wore when I was little. I wanted something real, just to feel close. Nora stared out the window. The street lamps had clicked on, casting long bars of gold across the sidewalk. It's in the Kindred Hands window, on a silver chain, the hospice shop in Asheville. The line went silent. Nora continued. They hung it next to a note that says, A life of quiet strength. People stop and stare at it all the time. Bethany's breath was uneven now. You gave it away? I gave it to people who would recognize its weight without needing a name attached. More silence. Then, smaller, almost a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt you. Nora didn't flinch. You just didn't mean to get caught. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. No splash. Just a deep, inevitable sink. On the other end, Bethany didn't speak, but Nora could hear her crying now. Not performative, not curated. Just the raw, stunned sobs of someone who thought they'd been misunderstood, only to find they'd been seen too clearly. Nora didn't fill the silence. She let it exist. I loved him, Bethany said eventually. Even if I didn't say it the right way. I know, Nora replied. But love that isn't practiced is just a pose. It fades fast when the lights turn off. Bethany sniffled. I didn't know how to love him back. And now you do? No, Bethany admitted. But I want to learn. Nora closed her eyes. For the first time since the funeral, her chest didn't ache when her daughter spoke, but she didn't let go of her clarity. "I hope you do," Nora said gently, "because I'm not going to teach you." Bethany's breath caught. "You're cutting me off. I'm inviting you to show me who you are when there's nothing left to claim." A long pause. Then, "That's fair." It was the first honest thing Bethany had said in months. "I'll go see the ring," she added. "I'll go see what it means when someone else wears it." Nora smiled faintly. "Then maybe you'll finally be close to him." Bethany didn't say goodbye. She just ended the call quietly. Nora set the phone down on the armrest, then looked out the window again. The sky had gone full indigo. One star blinked into view, then another. Behind her, in the stillness of the house, the grandfather clock ticked forward like it always had. And somewhere across town, Meredith Kane's voice would be waiting, because tomorrow, Nora was finally going to knock on that red ranch house door. The envelope was cream-colored, hand-addressed in a narrow, slanted script. No return address, just the name M. Jensen in the corner. It arrived on a Wednesday, calm skies, the first warm light of December streaming across the floor of Frank's old study. Nora didn't open it right away. She held it in both hands as if it weighed more than paper should. The seal was intact, unfussy, private. She waited until Elaine and Tessa were both seated across from her, cups of tea steaming, the fireplace quietly crackling in the background. Then she opened it. The letter inside was 3 pages, written in pen. Neat, intentional, honest. Elaine read it aloud, voice soft and steady, until emotion pulled at her throat. "Dear Mrs. Hale, I didn't know how to start this letter. I've written it 4 times. I kept thinking I had to get the tone just right, to sound grateful enough, wise enough, deserving enough. But the truth is, I'm just a kid who thought college was for other people. I thought art was a luxury, and men like me weren't supposed to dream that way. Then someone said yes to me. You said yes to me, not with words, but with faith. I go to the workshop every day now. They let me clean the brushes even when I'm not scheduled. I sit at the bench with the name Frank Hale above it, and I try to be quiet enough to deserve the space. I didn't know him, but I feel like I do. The men in the shop say he used to work with purpose, that his hands were never idle. I want hands like that someday. Thank you for turning loss into something alive. Thank you for giving grief motion. Thank you for making room. I'll try to earn it every day. Sincerely, Malik Jensen. Elaine didn't finish reading the final line. She passed the letter to Nora with trembling fingers, blinking back tears that had already slipped free. Tessa sat still beside them, her eyes wide and wet. "His voice," she whispered. "He sounds like Dad." Nora nodded. "I thought that too." There was a tone in the boy's writing, measured, grateful, curious. A voice that moved with humility and meaning. Like Frank's when he wrote her from Germany in '83. When he asked how the snow had fallen back home, and whether she was still making blackberry jam with Elaine. Frank's old letters were stored in the second drawer of the desk. Yellowed, creased, ink slightly faded, but every word still etched with care. She opened the drawer now, laid Malik's letter on top of Frank's stack. Not to overwrite, not to replace, but to connect. Tessa leaned forward. "He'd be proud of what you did, Mom." Nora didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she exhaled. "He always believed love should move forward." Elaine smiled through her tears. "Then you've been carrying him the right way." Outside the window, the wind shifted. A gentle breeze pushing through the brittle branches, scattering a few last leaves like they were reluctant to go. Nora stood and moved toward the bookshelf, where a framed photo of Frank sat, him in the backyard, sleeves rolled, carving the armrest of a chair he never got to finish. His expression was the same one Malik wore in the newspaper article. Purpose, focus, peace. She picked up the photo, held it against her chest for a moment, then turned back toward the study door. "I have to go see her," Nora said quietly. Elaine looked up. "Meredith," Nora nodded. "I thought I could let it rest. That closure was the letter, or the workshop, or the scholarship." Tessa stood, eyes searching her mother's. "But it's not, is it?" "No," Nora said, steady now. "Closure's not something you receive. It's something you offer. And I owe her something I didn't know I did." The room fell quiet again. Then Tessa reached into her coat pocket. pulling out the address slip, still folded, still untouched. She placed it in her mother's hand. Then let's go hear her side. Nora nodded once, and this time she didn't flinch when the truth waited on the other side of a door. The soil was warm beneath her fingers, loamy, soft, alive. Nora knelt beside the front garden bed, planting the last of the wildflower seeds she'd saved from a trip to Cherokee last spring. Coneflower, black-eyed Susan, milkweed, flowers that didn't ask for applause, they just bloomed, and gave the bees a reason to return. She smoothed the earth gently, brushing dirt from the ridges of her knuckles. It had been months since the funeral, weeks since she knocked on Meredith Kane's door and learned everything Frank never said aloud. But this morning felt like something new, not a chapter beginning, but a landscape settling. Tessa stepped out from the side gate, carrying a bundle of fresh gravel in her arms. "Path's halfway redone," she said, sweat on her brow. "You sure you want the stones in a curve?" "I like the look of a detour," Nora said, without looking up. "Straight lines are for people in a hurry." Tessa dropped the bag beside the new brick edge, then crouched to catch her breath. "You know, this is nicer than therapy." Nora smiled. "It is therapy." They worked for a while without speaking, placing stones, trimming hedges, resetting the path that once led to nothing in particular but now led to a bench they'd moved from the backyard, a place to sit, to watch things grow. The house had changed in small ways too. Frank's study was now a quiet room for reading and sketching. The dining room no longer felt like a stage. And the front porch had a new coat of paint, deep green, like moss in morning light. Her phone buzzed from the steps. She glanced at it. "Gavin, one new message. The store's almost paid off. We're keeping things small now. Better that way. Hope the wildflowers are coming up." Nora read the message once, then set the phone aside. No reply needed. His words carried humility now, steady, slow, and unpolished. It was enough. Bethany hadn't reached out since the hospice window. But silence, Nora had realized, wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was space. Elaine arrived just before sunset, carrying a thermos and 2 mismatched cups. She passed Nora a steaming mug and flopped onto the garden bench like she owned it. "You gave everything away," she said, "and somehow kept yourself." Nora looked out across the hills. The last of the day's light stretched golden across the sky, kissing the tops of the trees. It shimmered on the gravel path, winked off the surface of the garden stones. "That was the point," Nora murmured. They sat for a long time in companionable silence. A breeze rolled through, rustling the flowers already peeking through the dirt. The air smelled of lavender and cut grass, with the faintest trace of ash from someone's chimney down the road. Tessa joined them, wiping her hands on her jeans, and handed Nora a small notebook, the leather-bound journal Frank had once used for workshop sketches. She had repurposed it, writing in the back. "Thought you'd want to finish it," Tessa said. Nora opened to the final blank page. She picked up the pen tucked into the spine, thought for a moment. Then wrote, "I gave everything away and gained him back in memory." She paused. And then below it, in smaller print, she added, "Some things stay, just not the way we expect." She closed the journal and held it for a moment, the way you hold something that's finished and full, but not heavy. Tessa rested her head on Nora's shoulder. Elaine poured the last of the tea, and across the horizon, the mountains glowed like they were holding the sun a little longer, just for her.